Welcome to Modern Dogma, a Christian considering today's ideas. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Modern Dogma. It's great to be on air with you all again. I know it's been a while. We'll be starting a new series today where I'd like to just share with you all some insights that I find as I do my daily quiet times with the Lord, meditating upon the scriptures. This isn't at all supposed to be a replacement for you all personally doing your own study of the Word of God. Something interesting to note. The Bible never tells us to read the Word. It always says to study, to meditate. These are all synonyms, and this is something that is a personal responsibility for each individual Christian. But that being said, we all are gifted with different ways of thinking, different perspectives that we all have. That's not to say that there are different doctrines or different theological conclusions we should be coming to, but the way we see those same doctrines, the way it impacts us personally in our lives, the way we especially seek to apply these uniform, consistent theological conclusions and doctrines the Bible gives us is unique to each individual. And I've always been blessed whenever I talk to somebody and we're reading the same scripture, maybe we're in a small group together, and I see that something that they see in the Bible that is a little bit different. It's unique to their personality. It's a unique way of displaying and delivering that same doctrine in their perspective that I don't see. And I hope in a small microcosmic way, this QT series that I'm doing can be the same kind of blessing for you all. It's going to be pretty extemporaneous. There's going to be minimal editing. These are supposed to be just like quick little short things, but I hope you guys enjoy it. Would love some feedback if you want to give me a review or send me a personal DM on Twitter or Instagram. Always looking for feedback. But today's quiet time comes from Exodus chapter 28 when I was meditating upon Yahweh's stipulations for the priestly garments. So let me first give some context here from Exodus chapter 28. I'll start from verse 1, and I'll just kind of jump around. And the Lord's word says, "Then bring near to you Aaron, your brother," so he's speaking to Moses, who is the leader of Israel. They just came out of Egypt, out of bondage into slavery. God made them a nation overnight, and the king of this nation is Yahweh, and he's stipulating how he is to be worshipped. And he commands Moses, "Bring near to you Aaron, your brother, and his sons with him from among the people of Israel to serve me as priests. Aaron and Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. And you shall make holy garments." So that's what this passage is about. It's the specific type of clothing that the priests that are the mediators between the Israelites, the ordinary Israelites, the worship they offer to God is mediated through this special religious class called priests. And the ones that are serving as priests are Moses' brother Aaron and his 4 sons here, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Verse 2, "And you shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother for glory and for beauty." And I'm going to jump down here now to verse 31, where it states, "You shall make the robe of the ephod all of blue. It shall have an opening for the head in the middle of it, with a woven binding around the opening, like the opening in a garment, so that it may not tear. On its hem you shall make pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet yarns around its hem, with bells of gold between them, a golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate." So it's alternating around the hem of the robes at the very bottom edge of this middle layer, this blue robe that the priests are supposed to wear, the high priest rather. "And it shall be on Aaron when he ministers, and its sound shall be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord, and when he comes out," and this is the key phrase that struck me, "so that he does not die." So this is the exact kind of clothing, this middle layer with this alternating bell and pomegranate, this bell that's supposed to be tinkling. And it says here in verse 35, "so that Aaron does not die." That's the purpose of why he has to wear this particular type of garment. And then the same thing for Aaron's 4 sons, who are not the high priest, right? Only the high priest is able to do certain functions, namely going into the holiest section of the tent of meeting, which later becomes a temple. So you have the holy section, and then you have the holiest of holies, where what's known as the Ark of the Covenant. That's where God's like most direct version of his presence is revealed revealed between the cherubim, these golden cherubim figurines that's on top of the lid of this thing called the Ark of the Covenant. And this section, this Holy of Holies, only the high priest is able to enter, and that's Aaron. It's just one singular person. But his 4 sons are also priests, and they also have duties that they perform in the temple or the tent of meeting at this point. And they also have very particular clothing that they're supposed to wear. And these clothing regulations are stipulated in verse 40, starting from verse 40, where it states, "For Aaron's sons you shall make coats and sashes and caps. You shall make them for glory and beauty, and you shall put them on Aaron your brother and on his sons with him, and shall anoint them and ordain them and consecrate them, that they may serve me as priests. You shall make for them linen undergarments to cover their naked flesh. They shall reach from the hips to the thighs, and they shall be on Aaron and on his sons when they go into the tent of meeting, or when they come near the altar to minister in the holy place, lest they bear guilt and die." So again, that's the key phrase. Lest they bear guilt and die, they have to wear these very specific type of clothing. "And this shall be a statute forever for him and for his offspring after him." So I think the first thing we have to note is the worship of God. He revealed his name as Yahweh, which refers to his covenant, his promise-keeping nature. He's a faithful God, right? And he makes covenants. The worship of God is very much an organized religion. You see that throughout all the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. When it comes to these laws and policies and regulations for the nation, the theocratic nation of Israel that is run by God, it is very much an organized religion. And it's full with regulations and very specific laws and rules that you have to follow. So this is already contradictory to what are known as theological liberals. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, I recommend you go back and listen to episode 5, where we define what theological liberalism and theological conservatism is, which is not the same thing as what's often conflated with what's known as political conservatism and liberalism. They're actually not the exactly same terms. They're distinct ideas. But anyway, go back and listen to episode 5 if you want some more help on what I'm talking about here. But a lot of theological liberalism, which is characterized by this idea that you can worship God any way that you imagine, that you get to set the boundaries for how you approach God and what worship looks like. And the idea of organized religion, quote unquote, is a dirty word because, oh, God is so big and he's so vast. How dare we try to box him inside a little boundary of rules and regulations and stipulations? I have news for people like that. God himself is the one that defines that box. I mean, there's a germ of truth that God is so large and huge and he cannot be bound by anything man-made, but God himself defines for himself and for us how we are to approach him. He self-defines. So it's really, you got to flip it the other way around. How dare you, as a mere man, tell God that he can or cannot lay down organized rules for how he is supposed to be worshipped. So the worship of the Christian God, the biblical God, is very much an organized religion. Jesus was a man that was part of an organized religion. He specifically said not a single marker, not a single vowel point, no jot or tittle, as he specifically said it, which refers to the smallest little vowel points when it comes to the alphabet that they use, the written language that they use. Not a single one of those will pass away until every part of the Mosaic law, every part of Scripture will be fulfilled. So Jesus was a man that did everything that was considered righteous, including following every single letter of the law. So that contradicts theological liberalism. That's the first insight we get from reading texts like Exodus 28 here, which goes into these excruciating, exacting details about the exact kind of clothing that the priests are supposed to wear when they are supposed to approach God as the mediators for Israelite worship. Now, let me just give a very quick synopsis of what we just read and also some other sections of Exodus 28 that I did not read about what exactly the high priestly garment looked like. So the first layer, touching your skin, is a very long sleeve linen undergarment that covers the whole body. And God specifically states that you're supposed to cover over your nakedness. So that's a whole separate topic there. But Nudity is not a biblical thing. It's not it's not a moral good, by the way. Okay, so all these artists and stuff out there that like to do nude portraits, and there's some silly quote out there. I forget by who. I didn't do the research for this part about it. Like, oh, why do you paint nude portraits? Oh, it's because I want to paint these people the way God sees them. I forget, Leonardo da Vinci or some silly person, but that's not a moral good. Okay, nudity is not a good thing. You're supposed to cover up, and that's because even though we were made without clothing, with the fall of man into sin, nudity becomes a point of shame, and there's instruction there about how even us in our intrinsic, the most core part of who we are is covered with sin and shame. That's how far we fell from the glorious way God made us. Okay, totally going off on a tangent. Didn't mean to do that. But the first layer is supposed to be this long sleeve linen undergarment that covers the whole body of the high priest, Aaron in this case. On top of that, there's a middle layer, which is this blue robe. This is the robe I want to talk about in a second, specifically the hem at the bottom here. And then on top of the blue robe is probably the most famous piece of the high priest garment, which is the ephod. And this is like this sleeveless garment. Some people depict it as almost like a kitchen apron with no shoulder part. Some people have a shoulder piece. There are things mounted on the shoulders, by the way. And then you have these 12 precious stones, which encompasses the breastpiece, and each stone represents one of the tribes of Israel. Okay, so what we discover in verses 31 to 35 of Exodus 28 is part of this blue robe, this middle layer, okay, is there's supposed to be these decorative pomegranates that alternate with these golden bells. And what it states specifically in verse 35 is Aaron, when he's walking around inside the tent of meeting, which again becomes a temple later, he needs to ensure that these bells are sounded. You hear these tinkling of these bells everywhere, and he needs to wear this exact outfit. And it states in verse 35, quote, so that he does not die, end quote. And you see the same thing with Aaron's sons, who has to wear this coat, the sash, the caps. They have to be anointed in a particular way. They have to wear a linen undergarment again to cover over their naked flesh in verse 42. And in verse 43 it says, quote, lest they bear guilt and die, end quote. And what I really want to talk about today is the fact that what we discover in these passages that threatens death to these priests under this Levitical system of worship, this organized system of worship, is there are no unaccountable bureaucrats in God's government. You see, God incentivizes his leaders to follow his laws and in turn set a good example for the rest of Israel by appealing to self-interest. You see? What happens to these priests if they don't follow these laws, if they don't wear this exact type of outfit? What if they walk in with a tank top and flip-flops? I know they don't exist, but you know what I'm saying. Like, what if they walk into, the holy place just wearing whatever they want? Maybe they think of whatever their quote-unquote Sunday best is and think, oh, I think this is a really nice outfit that should be respectful to God. What if they even have that nice kind of heart motive, right? But it's not the exact type of outfit that God himself stated that they needed to wear. What happens? They die. God appeals to self-interest, namely self-preservation, as a negative reinforcement to ensure that they follow his laws. Now, why does God have to appeal to self-interest? And the answer is pretty clear, right? If you've read Genesis 3 at least, if you've at least read up to the 3 first chapters of the Bible, that's oftentimes not much further than people get, right? When they try to, do their New Year resolution of read through the whole Bible, you at least get to the first 3 chapters, hopefully, of the first book of the Bible. If you've read Genesis 3 and you learned about the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, you discover humans are sinners. We are selfish. We're self-centered. And that means effective government policy begins with this understanding that humans are self-centered, and therefore it requires properly aligned incentives. Effective government policy begins with incentives. And what are incentives? Incentives are basically answering the question, what's in it for me? And there's 2 types of incentives. You've got the positive, you've got the negative. Positive reinforcement. Here are rewards for doing good things. That's incentive type number 1. And then you've got the negative reinforcement, the negative incentives. Here's the punishment if you don't do the right thing, if you don't follow this law. And this is why centralized economies, centralized governments throughout human history, such as like the Marxist communist regimes, are so inefficient or just downright dysfunctional because at their atheistic core, these Marxist regimes, which are explicitly atheistic, and then you have other sorts of centralized economies and centralized governments which are effectively atheistic, at their core, because they deny God, they in turn deny God's word, which states that men have a sin nature. They deny sin nature. And therefore, they don't understand the power of incentives to produce, to be effective, to make sure people are actually being effective and functional, productive citizens inside the nation. So a great example of this was in the early 1930s under Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union. Stalin implemented a policy called the collectivization of agriculture. And the idea, the rationale behind this policy was he was going to take a bunch of small farms and forcibly combine them together to make these gigantic super farms. And the idea was if you take all these little small farms that are doing their own little thing, that's not going to produce as much stuff, was the thought. So let's turn them into a super farm. Let's turn them into like the Walmart of farms, and you can make them more efficient. You can produce higher output, steady food production. Now, the problem with this policy was once you forcibly take all these farmers' private property, right, that they were invested in maintaining and trying to grow and advance their business in order to make money for themselves, right? Once these farmers lost that profit motive because all of their private property was forcibly taken by the state, these so-called super farms, these collectivized farms, became completely unproductive. The farmers became unproductive, ultimately. And in fact, there are anecdotes of some of these farmers, out of resentment because of this forcible seizure, they would actually purposefully sabotage these farms that were being combined together. They would slaughter their own animals. You're not going to have my cow. If I can't have it, you're not going to have it. So they just killed it. Or they hid some of the crops that they were producing from the state. It just was a complete disaster. Why? Because there was no incentive. They weren't able to answer the question, what's in it for the farmers for them to participate in this law? And it's the same thing with leadership. So this is at the citizenry level. We're talking about leadership here when it comes to the priests in Exodus 28. Minimal editing, people. Unaccountable leadership always produces, eventually, corruption. So again, taking the example of the Marxists, any kind of totalitarian regime, when you have unaccountable leadership because they themselves are the ultimate authority, because men inside of our hearts, every single one of us, and Romans 3 makes it clear, like, no, not one. Nobody is righteous. Yes, including you. I know you're thinking you yourself, but I'm the smart one. I'm the good one. No, not a single one. Every single human being, no matter your background, no matter your skill, no matter your intellect, no matter who you are, every single person has a sin nature. Every single person is selfish. And therefore, when you are not held accountable, when there is no skin in the game for you, when you have no oversight, it's just a matter of time before you become corrupted. As the phrase goes, the mantra goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And to a lesser extent, even in our so-called more enlightened democratic regimes like the United States, you have little pockets of unaccountable or lesser accountability or even unaccountability. And specifically, I think of the federal government, right? If you're a federal worker, it is very, very hard to get fired. I know this from experience working for the federal government for 9 years. And because it's so difficult for you to be fired, you certainly aren't fired due to performance reasons. And your promotions are almost like a pre-scheduled thing. It's very difficult to get promoted actually due to your merit or the work you put in. It's almost just a matter of years. And then unless you're doing something like overtly illegal, like harassing somebody or stealing or something, it's very hard to lose your job. And as a result, what do you see for those of you like me that spent time personally in the federal government? You just see so much waste and how slow everybody moves. There is no incentive, in other words, positive or negative, for people to be effective, to be as efficient as possible, to work hard, because people are not just going to work hard out of the goodness of their hearts. There needs to be something in it for them, whether self-preservation or some reward for them to really put in the effort. That's why by and large, I know this isn't a hard and fast rule because, computers technically came from federal laws, but by and large, most of our innovations, most of our great technological advancements, they come from places like Apple, right? They come from Microsoft. They come from, 3M. They come from industry. They come from the private sector. People that know that when I, generally speaking, put in the effort, I'm going to get something out of it. And the harder I work, the more I'm going to get, right? And if I don't work, I'm going to get fired. Or if I don't work, I'm going to go out of business and I'm going to impoverish my family, right? There needs to be something in it. There needs to be skin in the game, because people in and of ourselves, inside of our hearts, we're fallen creatures and we are selfish. And that is why there's always accountability in the governance and in the economy of God in the Levitical law. These priests, if they don't follow the law, they will die. And that's the mistake Israel made later in 1 Samuel chapter 8, when they didn't understand biblical anthropology, the biblical doctrine of man, and they didn't understand that unaccountable leadership always leads to some kind of tragedy. And they were rejecting God as king, and they wanted an earthly king. They wanted a human sinner to have totalitarian rule over them, just like every other nation in the world. And what does God warn in 1 Samuel 8? He says, okay, you're going to reject me. You want centralized authority. You want to destroy the incentive structure. You want lack of accountability for a human being, a fallen human being. Okay, I'll give it to you. And you know what's going to happen to you? You're going to get forcible conscription. This tyrant is going to take your sons and daughters, force them into servitude. He's going to levy burdensome taxes on you in verse 15. And then it says in verse 18, quote, "And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." Now, it's a pretty terrifying warning, isn't it? And yet, we know what happens if you read Chronicles and Kings. People get exactly what they ask for, right? So effective politics deals with reality as it actually is another way to put it. Not as you want to imagine the world to be, right? And I would say this is one of the hallmarks of a lot of the political left. Not that the right don't commit this as well, but I would say one of the primary characteristics of the political left throughout the developed and modern age, such as a Marxist, is they like to imagine a fanciful world where people are good. They just deny the reality of what's very clear in front of them. Like anyone that raises young kids, how can you say with a straight face that people are good? You think these kids have to learn to lie and steal? This is innate inside of them. Do you like, if you've raised more than one kid and you see your kids fighting with each other, right? Like, is this something that they were taught because of their environment or whatever? Who taught Cain murder? He came up with it by himself, the first murder. Nobody told him, like, hey, if you bash a rock on someone's head hard enough, blue goo comes out. And this analogy is getting away from me, but you know what I'm saying? Like, nobody had to teach these people how to commit sin. It's inside of our hearts. That's where sin is sourced from. But these Marxists and the political left, they live in this fantasy world where they just deny reality as it is, think people are good, and think that people just out of the goodness of their hearts, just their innate goodness, their innate virtue, they're going to produce and help each other and govern themselves well. Like, libertarians think the same kind of silly fantasy, which is why they deny the need for a state or a government, which God made, by the way, right? But reality needs to be ascertained and understood for how it actually is, not according to what you want it to be. And the reality is people are selfish sinners. That's clear for everybody. This is why collectivist co-ops don't work, right? There needs to be a profit motive. Yes, I get the fact that it's kind of gross to think about. That's the point, though. Like, that human are selfish. It's like, you're not going to work hard unless you have a promotion lined up that's really gross. Like, you should be working hard because you want to benefit society and glorify God, blah, blah, blah. But that's how people are. Even Christians, sadly, right? We have this flesh nature. That's reality. There needs to be money, and there needs to be punishment for not doing the right thing. And that's because we are selfish sinners, including the leaders. Government structures must answer the question from the top all the way to the bottom, what's in it for me? Positive reinforcement, rewards for good leadership. Negative reinforcement, punishment for bad leadership. That's exactly the kind of standard God laid down in Exodus chapter 28. Because the truth is, if you miss the importance of aligning incentives properly, you are, in effect, denying the reality of man's sinful condition, which means you are, in effect, denying the reality of God. You can follow Modern Dogma on Instagram at Modern Dogma or Twitter at Modern_Dogma, and please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Men err, God is sovereign.